participating in the work that you're doing. Fantastic to see. 2 seconds on me. I'm spent time working with Accenture and Deloitte and set up Deloitte's blockchain lab for Europe, Middle East and Africa, based out of Dublin, and then helped set up Consensus in Ireland, which I left in May. And I've also alongside a governmental agency in Ireland called the IDA, set up an initiative called Blockchain Ireland. And I'm at the moment, I have set up a company, and my job is to help companies really embrace and start their digital transformation journeys. So anyway, that's enough about that stuff. You can find out more, as Kathleen said, in relation to LinkedIn. But delighted to answer any questions that anyone has based on my experience and share any learnings and probably mistakes that I've made along the way.
I would be having some questions later on, but yeah, I can introduce a little bit myself as well. I was working with basically with Nationwide Building Society as a digital consultant predominantly, and since 2017 I was working alongside with another co-founder. The company's name was Chainwine. Then we got some funding to run blockchain products. So since then I have been then working with multiple small organizations to implement blockchain in legal industry, in the supply chain, and in what you call the basically supply chain or these two. So multiple networks have been explored, and then based on that one, I am currently working with Confirm Center, doing PhD in University of Limerick, sponsored by Confirm. So I'm representing them here.
Martin, do you have a question specifically though? So we're just on a bit of a time crunch. Everybody wants to get back to work.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So my most of the questions will be regarding the supply chain area onto the blockchain. If there are some presentations or some implementations, then I will be interested to get them reviewed. I mean, add them on my thesis, on my research thesis.
Sure. Okay. So I think there's a couple that spring to mind. Number one, in the Providence area, my former employer, Consensus, they did an interesting piece of work with Louis Vuitton, or LVMH, that fashion group, specifically looking at the tracking and tracing of goods from, I guess, from calf, in relation to leather. So actually how handbags were made in certain parts of Italy, how they're transported in to reach the, I guess, the prestigious shops and expensive shops in Paris or London or even in Dublin. And for me, the interesting thing what they did is they're trying to show provenance of a product and show that it wasn't a counterfeit. And this was a big problem, and still is, for, I guess, high-end luxury goods, because what was happening was somebody was going into a shop, was purchasing a genuine, I guess, LVMH bag or Louis Vuitton bag. They were then exiting the shop, and what they were doing is 2 weeks later or so, they'd return the bag, but they wouldn't return the real bag. They'd return a replica, they'd get money back and give the replica back to the shop. So that's like a double win for, I guess, the criminal. And so what LVMH did was they brought out a solution in association with Microsoft. They created a platform called Aura. So I know Microsoft are involved in the hackathon today. And what they did is that they developed a solution where you have to scan a QR code, and then you're prompted to type in the serial number of the bag into the front end that is displayed when you scan the QR code, and then it will show that a product is actually what it says it is. That's number one. The really interesting part for me out of this is, I'm sure you're deeply familiar with the kind of provenance and all that good stuff, but LVMH is now looking at how they could potentially white label that technology solution to other fashion houses, because they face the same problems. So you're seeing a fashion house beginning to act more like a technology company, and that for me, I think, is pretty fascinating.
Okay, so the solution which was provided by Microsoft to this Louis bag, do we have any architecture diagram or some other information regarding that, some yellow paper Is that then we get it? No.
No, I'm pretty sure that's going to be IP that LVMH is going to want to hold close to its chest because it's trying to sell that product.
Okay. So,
I was kind of along those same lines. There's quite a few of the teams are looking at something similar to this idea of validating a product, but in terms of food. So do you have any examples that they might be able to sort of bounce off of there?
Sure, and this is definitely...
Go. Keep going, yeah.
Sure. So I think there's work that's being looked at, and I see Matthew Van Nieuwkerk is also on the call as well, which is great. Lovely to see you, Matthew. There's work that's been done in the US around this, beef chain, and Killian, who I know is going to be a speaker later, is familiar with this as well, where you're able to take as a calf is born or as an animal is born, you're able to take a clip of their ear, which is actually mandatory for a lot of different livestock, and their DNA is stored. And then you're able to see and use that as a base set of data to track a piece of meat as it is actually produced in an abattoir, and then as it's shipped from, I guess, a farm in Wexford all the way through to Shanghai, using a similar process where you attach QR code. So as you have an expensive steak that's from Ireland in Shanghai, you scan the QR code and you're able to see that full history and lineage. My personal view on these things is that I think they're probably a little bit before their time. I think as consumers become more knowledgeable as to supply chains, I think their base level expectations in terms of understanding where goods come from is increasing and increasing. So I do think solutions like this will become kind of just standard, but we're not quite there yet. So that's one area. Another former client of mine is a very big ingredients business, one of the world's largest. And they came under pressure from their client. So their client said, hey, we want to know who your suppliers are. And the company said, here are our suppliers. And then the big grocery store, who's a big purchaser of the ingredients, said, actually, we want to see who your suppliers are, all the way down several levels. And this had to be demonstrated. And so the company started looking to see what potential solutions are out there, and blockchain being one of them, to help them identify not just that first layer, but all the layers underneath. And I think as time goes by, and especially during, I guess, the period of time that we're in at the moment, where trust is very important, and having an understanding as to how things are made, and made to a certain standard, and made in certain locations, I think there's going to be just a greater and greater onus for companies to be able to demonstrate that right back to the consumer.
And so then, because I know this is something a couple of the teams are working on, getting down then to the very start, where the cow level. How is the access then being created? Because you were talking about Louis Vuitton being this, or LVMH, this massive, being able to do it, but what about the little guys?
Very good question. And I guess this is where big companies need to try and think about creating ecosystems where, for their specific product or their specific service, or their specific line, where they need to be able to, I guess, provide links for the smaller entities to have access points into that greater ecosystem. Very hard for small players to create ecosystems where the big guys will be drawn into them. Unfortunately, that's not how business works, and it will take kind of the larger entities to create those all-encompassing ecosystems. The challenge will be, how does it benefit the smaller entities as much as the larger entities? And that's normally where profit comes in. So I think it's a good question, but a tricky one.
Sophie and I are just coordinating microphones. 1 second. She's going to ask a question.
Okay. Hi, Lory. Sorry, because we're in the same room, and
Hello.
if we speak at the same time, it messes with the sound. Yeah, I was thinking, do you think that the pressure of knowing where a product has been made and having all of this information would come from the end user, because they would be more keen to know where that comes from, because for safety reasons, or because now they're more conscious about what's going on in the world? Or it would be for companies to be not liable in case of problems? Where do you think what is going to drive the others? do you think?
Sure. So I think there's probably two different angles that I look at on that. Number one, I think the pressure from consumer is very important, right? So as consumers, and you and I and everyone on this call, as our standards for that level of transparency increase, then guess what? Corporates will have to do that. Corporates will have to meet the consumer demands, and whichever company is meeting those demands is where customers will go, which means profits will follow. So I think that's a very important part, and certainly is kind of, I guess, I want to be academic. That's where I get interested, because that's where the business opportunities are. The other pressure for me is from a regulatory perspective. So if different food boards or different countries put forward standards and regulations that, from now on X, we need to be able to demonstrate that things were done in a certain way, and you need to use this technology to prove it, well, then the companies have no choice. And I think in the middle, and you raise a very good point, in the middle, there are countries and there are companies thinking, you know what, do we need to be able to demonstrate this level of transparency right now? Is it required? Is it important? Is it going to help us generate revenue? And companies are trying to figure out that answer for themselves. Maybe it's not important today, but will be important in the future. Or maybe, you know what, we think this is important today, and we need to come up with a solution. So we'll be the first to market to create that standard, and everyone else will follow.
I forgot to unmute myself. Does anybody else want to ask a question? You can ask something specific to the project you're working on, or I'll just keep asking questions that I find interesting. So don't be shy. It's okay. Okay, I'll ask another one then. So then, what kind of, from the consumer standpoint and from the regulation standpoint a bit, how much then does educating kind of non-tech people, normal people, about what blockchain can do or why the sort of end-to-end following is important, contribute to both of those factors?
I think it's very important, and I think it's important on the basis that, from a business perspective, it does come down to what is the strategy of the business, and how are you adding value to customers, and how are you generating revenue. And if we kind of keep all of those things in mind, and then think about technology which helps facilitate and enable those things, what I'd be thinking is, well, okay, what are consumers' expectations today? How are they being met? Where do we think consumer expectations will be in the future? And what are we doing to I guess, meet those expectations in the future? And if we do think consumer expectations will increase around transparency, and we're doing nothing, well, then guess what? We're going to be playing catch up when those standards come out, and we're kind of quickly trying to play a Me Too offering. And I think the LVMH example shows that, you know what, they're leading the way. They think this is not only a good thing from a transparency in terms of how products are made and all that good stuff, but also they're seeing it as a way to generate revenue by selling that service to other players. So for me, I think it is it's an opportunity for companies to evaluate where do they see the consumer going. So to answer your question explicitly, I think education is really, really important, but it's coming back to where blockchain isn't the solution and isn't a strategy. It is understanding where is the value to the business, and how does blockchain perhaps facilitate that in a unique way that provides a unique offering to the market. And that in turn, you can perhaps charge a premium price, or you're going to capture market share, or maybe you're just going to retain market share because you're doing this and being different. But they're the different lenses that I look through. And I think we did a survey of executives around this time last year, and the results were that, the percentage of people that understood the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain was about 12% in the Irish market. So there's still a huge amount of education to be done. And that's what I was really surprised by, that, considering, I don't know how many talks I as one person, I'm sure everybody on this call is explaining blockchain many times, but 12% of senior executives really understanding what it is, that's still a very, very low level. And for me, I think it's really important that people understand a whole host of emerging technologies, blockchain being one, but definitely on the basis, how does it add value? How does it make my product unique? How do we attract customers, retain customers, and how do we generate revenue from it?
One other question during the traceability. So if your vendors of any product are multiple legislative areas, how would you implement the same laws of the same product across different legislative areas where they have been produced? There are different laws. So, is there any strategy or any standardization?
I don't like good question, and I think this is a tricky one. The laws that are put down are specific and relative to each country, and in short, must be adhered to. So I guess the way I'd be looking at this, and whether it's from a food perspective, regulatory perspective, financial services perspective, the key thing here, and Ireland is really well placed in this area, is that how do you solve a problem for that one specific country with that one specific, I guess, legal set, and then get it up and running, get it right, get it working, get customers, get adoption, get revenue, and then you've got a story to build on. Like the next obvious market from Ireland is the UK. We have a very similar legal system, and there's 60 million people. So you go from 4.5 million people to 60 million people. With a similar legal system. So that for me is an easy jump. And then after that, then you're starting to go into, I guess, continental Europe or the US, where you're going to have to start to look at your product and make sure that it's adopting and following those specific rules. Because the last thing that you want is you don't want to enter into a country, as I'm sure you know, and then you design a product which is not fit for purpose with the existing legal standards. You're going to find yourself in all sorts of, I guess, problems and potential lawsuits, and that will do your brand damage when you're perhaps only just taking off. So I think start small, using kind of agile principles and lean principles. Start small, get it right, and slowly scale on an iterative basis.
Right.
Matthew, go ahead.
Any specific work has been done towards the towards the integration of multiple blockchain networks? For example, one system has been created on Hyperledger Fabric, the other one on Corda. So we do not have shared. Okay, how would you integrate that? Because I was doing some research papers. There was quite less work has been done across to integrate multiple to systems which are across multiple networks, are implemented onto multiple networks. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name. There's an English company specifically that's looking at this. I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name. It's embarrassing that I've forgotten. And they focus on this specifically. It'll come to me in a second or two, and I'll either say it in the out loud or in the chat, but it'll come to me in a second.
No problem. Yeah.
I think it's a tough nut to crack, but they be the company that I think that are doing strongly in this area.
That's fine. Yeah, no problem. I will try to find, because my research area is the same on that part. So I thanks for yourself. Well, yeah, there's another question. Are the governments accepting
Mateen, I'm gonna let one of the other participants throw a question in. Cool.
I'll come back later.
Kevin's asking about monetization. So how do we make money from the ideas being discussed over the weekend? Can you explain tokenization and how it could be applicable to the project ideas that may fall out from this weekend?
Yes, so 2 seconds if I can. Thank you. Am I pronouncing your name? Is it Kathleen? How do you like me to pronounce?
I'll answer to any of them. It's fine.
Okay. And Fiona Delaney is just dialed in there and has given the answer that I was looking for. It's Gilbert Viridian of Quant Network in the UK. So that's the company I was trying to remember to answer the previous question. Thank you, as ever, Fiona, for that prompt. The question there is around monetization. The key thing here is, I guess, where do you see the value? And I think if we go back to agile, lean, startup principles, when you're creating the businesses that you're doing over the weekend, definitely start thinking about what problem are you solving, and what problem are you solving? What's the addressable market? And try, and this is what I've seen from, I've participated in a number of hackathons. The folks that end up doing well, they go out and get research or they road test their idea and talk to people, interview people, even during the weekend, to say, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you pay for this? Is this a good idea? Are we solving a good problem? Yes or no? And that is the key thing as to whether you'll find out whether you can monetize it or not. And I'll be the first to say I spent a lot of time looking at blockchain ideas, and you know what? There probably are really good problems to solve, but nobody wants to pay for them. So Kevin, I think the question that you asked there, sorry about the noise, is, I think it's a fantastic one, but I think it's one where possible, if you can try and think of who your ideal customer is, or create an ideal customer profile, and over the weekend try and get in touch with those people. And sorry, just the noise. If you think I'm that ideal customer, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. But use your network and get in touch with people going, hey, I've got this idea. I just wanted to bounce an idea off you. Is this a product or service you are willing to pay for? Because that is the fastest way for you to figure out, do we have an idea or not? And let me tell you, and I'll be the first to say this, God knows I've come up with lots of ideas where nobody is willing to pay anything. You think it's going to be high value, high volume. It ends up being low value, low volume.
Nice. And I love when our speaker or guests come on and segue exactly into the next task that the teams are supposed to do in the day. Perfect. If anybody else wants to ask a question? Or no? Cool.
Well, I have.
Okay, one more.
I'll wait. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, if anybody else wants to ask a question, we have a few more minutes.
So I have. Right. So one other question. So regarding the smart contracts, for example, when we are having smart contracts implemented in Ethereum or Hyperledger Fabric, for example, do they have legal standing? Any territory or any country who recognize them? Those set of conditions we have written, for example, a contract between lender or the borrower, does it have, okay, so if these conditions are written in the smart contract, any legislative territory or government recognizes them or not at this stage, or any appetite going forward?
The most progressive that I've seen is the UK, and they've actually published a paper on this specific topic. I don't think it's a cut and dry case where we accept smart contracts full stop. But there was a paper published last year by the UK government, and specifically in relation to their thought process around smart contracts. And that for me was the most progressed that I have seen or read to date. So unsurprising, the UK has a huge innovation budget, has an innovation mandate at the regulatory level, and they're using technology, not just blockchain, as a competitive differentiator for businesses and individuals to base themselves in the UK so that they create businesses, and obviously tax then goes to the UK government. And I think blockchain is one of these things that the UK government is doing to fall in line with that. And I say that I think it's a really positive thing. So I would Google, if you Google UK smart contracts, you'll come across that paper on behalf of the FCA or the Bank of England.
All right. Okay.
Perfect. Cool. I think we've pretty much got to the end of the time that you've been so kind to give us today. If you want to add anything else, Lory, inspirational words for our teams for the next day and a half.
Look, thank you very much to you guys for the opportunity to speak. So to Sophie and to Kathleen, and then also if anybody wants any help over the weekend, I'd be delighted to help. Just drop me a note on LinkedIn and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I think it's fantastic that you guys are undertaking the hackathon in the first place, especially over a weekend of your busy lives. I think it's really important. Certainly I have recommended that everybody should do at least one hackathon in their lifetime or career at least. So I think this is a really positive thing. And and looking forward to see all the fantastic ideas that you come up with. So keep up the great work.
Cool. Thank you so much, Lory. You're more than welcome to come and see the final pitches tomorrow as well. To see you.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I'm gonna
Thanks, everybody.
pass it over. Bye.
Bye.